All right, I thought I'd do one last video to sum it all up. So remember, this is called cellular respiration, and the whole purpose of cellular respiration is to make ATP. We're going to take the food that we eat, the glucose that's in that food, and we're going to make ATP, and there's all kinds of stuff that happens along the way. So this picture has helped us out quite a few times throughout all of the steps. Remember, this is one big cell. And so the light pink in the background is like cytoplasm, and there's going to be a whole bunch of organelles in there, but we only focus in on the one organelle, the mitochondria, because that's where part of cellular respiration happens. So remember, the first step is glycolysis. And glycolysis doesn't happen in the mitochondria, it just happens in the cytoplasm, and it starts with this glucose molecule. Remember, the glucose molecule is actually a pretty complex molecule, but we only cared about the 6 carbons. So the 6-carbon glucose is going to go through all of those different steps that we looked at and ultimately make pyruvic acid. Pyruvate is what it says on my picture, but pyruvic acid is the same thing, and that's what your teacher calls it. So the pyruvic acid is that 3-carbon molecule that we make at the end of glycolysis. During glycolysis, remember, we make 4 ATP, but we used 2 to get it started, and so we only gained a total of 2 ATP. So it's great. We made some ATP, which puts us towards our goal here of making some ATP, but we didn't make a ton. More importantly, what we made are these little taxicabs for the electrons, or the little Ubers for the electrons, which are the NADH. Remember, it's the H that's carrying the electrons, and it's going to go into the electron transport chain. So at the end of glycolysis, we make our 3-carbon pyruvic acid, and that 3-carbon pyruvic acid is going to go into the mitochondria, and that's where we make a lot more of the ATP. So the pyruvic acid comes in, and then remember, in the Krebs cycle we build up more carbon molecules just so that we can break them down, and we keep breathing in oxygen, breaking off a carbon, breathing out carbon dioxide, and every time we break off a molecule of carbon, we release an electron, and so we end up making a whole lot more of these taxicabs, or these Ubers for the electrons. We make a bunch of NADHs, and we make some FADH2s. In both cases, the H's are carrying the electrons, and they also are going to go into the electron transport chain. And during this process, we make a little bit of ATP too. So far we've made 4 ATP. But more importantly, we've made these NADHs and FADH2s that are going to go into the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is where lots and lots and lots of ATP is made. This picture says about 25, but we usually say 32. I think your teacher says 34. It's kind of vague, the exact number. So what happens here is the NADHs and the FADH2s are going to drop off their hydrogens and their electrons. Ultimately, the oxygen is going to accept those electrons and make water, and we end up making a buttload of ATP. We make 32 or 34 ATP, and that's the really big deal there. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to compare that to this chemical reaction here. So your teacher is all about application. So let's think about where you use glucose. So glucose is the food that we eat. So like if I eat some pizza, I digest the pizza, I pull the glucose out of the pizza, and it's the glucose that goes into the cytoplasm of my cells to start all of this. So I use glucose during glycolysis. They kind of sound the same even. Where do I use oxygen? I use oxygen in the Krebs cycle and in the electron transport chain. I use it in the Krebs cycle because remember, we talked about breathing in oxygen and breaking off a carbon and attaching it to that carbon and then breathing out carbon dioxide. So that's where I use oxygen there. And then in the electron transport chain, we use oxygen as it's attracted to the electrons, and it's going to combine with the hydrogen that was in the NADH and FADH2s to make water. So these are the things that we need. These are the inputs for cellular respiration, and then these are the outputs for cellular respiration. The whole point of this thing is to make ATP. All right, we make 2 in glycolysis. Remember, we actually make 4, but we only gain 2. In Krebs cycle, we make 2, and in electron transport chain, we make 32 or 34, for a total of somewhere between 36 and 38, depending on what textbook you're using and stuff. So the other outputs are carbon dioxide and water. So where do we make those? We make the carbon dioxide in the Krebs cycle, because remember, we breathed in oxygen and broke off a carbon, attached it to the oxygen, and we breathed out carbon dioxide. So we released carbon dioxide every time we were going around that Krebs cycle. The electron transport chain is where we give off water. Remember when the NADHs and FADH2s drop off their hydrogens, and the hydrogens are collecting on one side, and they come through, and the hydrogens attach with oxygens and the electrons to make water, which is a waste product here when they're trying to make all those ATP. All right, so I think that is about it. I think that sums just about everything up for cellular respiration. Good luck on your quiz. I think you guys have got this.